Our presentation is about why sign language is a valid language. In this presentation, we will discuss the history that shapes the way sign language is today, a complex grammar that differs from spoken language, the difference between Mexican and American Sign Language, how baby sign language is used, deaf culture, the design features of sign language, and 2 important final questions.
I'm going to discuss some of the history of American Sign Language, which is also known as ASL. The two founders of ASL were Laurent Clark and Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. Gallaudet and Clark went to Hartford, Connecticut, and founded the American School for the Deaf in 1817. In the school, there were younger and older students and people who did and did not know how to sign. This diverse population helps prove that sign language is a valid language and culture because even though the majority of the population was deaf, there were also many people who wanted to learn sign language in order to communicate with everyone in their community. So now let's move on to the second slide, which is of Gallaudet University. Not only was Gallaudet one of the founders of the School of Deaf, he was also the founder of Gallaudet University, located in Washington, D.C., which was founded in 1864. This university provides an opportunity for those who are deaf and hard of hearing to be able to experience getting an education in a place where people are really united through their mutual experience and connection of being deaf. The students communicate by using sign language, which makes it a valid language and culture. Hearing individuals can also attend the university if they know how to sign. This then is considered to be their second language, which supports that ASL is a valid language and brings a sense of culture between the deaf and the hearing.
So now that we have discussed the history, we are going to talk about ASL grammar and word order. ASL word order follows a time, topic, comment format, or a time, object, subject, verb format, TOSV. Be verbs such as am, is, are, and was, and determiner words such as the and to are not used. When writing in ASL, it is also appropriate to use capital letters. So for example, in English it might say, at 5 o'clock I'm going to the store, but in ASL you would sign, 5 o'clock store I go. As you can see, the words are in TOSV format, and the words am, at, to, and the are not present. So when it comes to ASL word order, the object comes before the subject and the verb because ASL is considered a visual language. When signing, the other signer needs to know what the object is before the subject and verb in order to know what is being done to the object. So for example, in English, it might say, I put the apple on the shelf. But in ASL, you would sign, apple shelf put. This is so that the other signer knows that the apple is on the shelf. There is also grammar when it comes to rhetorical and non-rhetorical questions in ASL. Rhetorical questions are when the statements start with what, where, when, which, why, how, or who. At the end of the question, the signer's eyebrows would be raised. With non-rhetorical questions, which the answer would be yes or no, at the end of the question, the signer's eyebrows would go down. The eyebrows being raised or put down at the end of a question is the same idea as when a question is spoken in English, our voices go up at the end. Now there is another sign language called English Sign Language, ESL. With ESL, it is considered to be English translated into sign. This means that ESL follows English word order and grammar, not ASL. More fingerspelling is also used because in ESL they include be verbs and determiners. Fingerspelling is used when the signer spells out the smaller words by using the alphabet letters. Now that we talked about ASL and ESL grammar and word order, we are going to discuss another sign language called Mexican Sign Language.
Mexican Sign Language, or LSM, is its very own unique language. LSM is special in that it adds non-stationary finger signs to denote the accented letters found in the Spanish language. It's also interesting to note that in LSM, they do not have gendered signs, and if the context in the conversation is obviously referring to a female, then a non-gendered sign is used. If the context does not obviously denote that it's talking about a female, then a female suffix is added to the previous sign. An example is if you are referring to a girl child. A female suffix is added to the sign child to denote female. Sign language is becoming more mainstream with hearing parents, which brings us to baby signs.
Sign language can be used for babies to communicate with their parents. This makes sign language a valid language because hearing parents are using this form of communication to help their baby learn spoken language. Teaching sign to babies before they are able to speak opens the first line of communication between babies and their caregivers. This allows for children to communicate before the natural emergence of the motor and linguistic development required to produce verbal speech. Because of this, babies have reduced frustration, tantrums, and emotional outbursts because they can communicate what they need through a language as a result of this early communication. Parents use the sign language to help their baby learn spoken language. This ability to connect a concept to a gesture helps the baby connect a word to its meaning later in life when they begin learning spoken language. A benefit of learning sign language as a baby is earlier communication of needs and thoughts, which is essential to social and emotional development. In these diagrams below, you can see the simple sign gestures that babies are able to use, such as mommy, daddy, please, thank you, eat, more, and all done.
All right, so if we're talking about sign language, you can't forget deaf culture. Deaf culture can be defined as a set of learned behaviors of a group of deaf people that share language, values, rules for behavior, and traditions. Surprisingly, deaf culture wasn't recognized until 1965, which is just about 50 years ago. Back in the day, deaf people were actually referred to as deaf mutes or deaf and dumb, but recently people have gone on to reject those names because we found that deaf people are just as capable as hearing people. Language is actually one of the most important aspects of culture. Sign language is used by all deaf cultures around the world as a primary means of communication. Although different deaf cultures around the world in different countries use different signs unique to their own culture, overall they are all using sign language. Deaf cultures' rules for behavior include but are not limited to eye contact, facial expressions, introductions, and labels. Eye contact is something that is very important in deaf culture because it is the only way to show you're listening to someone. To give them eye contact, you will have to give them all your attention. And although how in English spoken language, it's rude to stare, but in sign language, you need to look at them directly to see what they're saying. Like Christine mentioned, facial expressions are important when asking questions. Also in sign language, you have extended introductions, which go beyond saying your first and last name. Sometimes you include what city you're from and what school you went to, just to be able to see if you have any similarities with a person. Also, people in deaf culture like to be referred to as just deaf, capital D, and reject any other labels that society puts on them, such as hearing impaired, or to say that they have a disability because they cannot hear. Now we can get into Hockett's design features of language.
Sign languages meet all of Hockett's 9 design features of language. Sign languages are culturally transmitted and use visual gestures and nonverbal facial expressions as its mode of communication, just as you would in a spoken language. This allows for infinite amounts of utterances, pragmatically communicating the wants and needs and ideas of its speakers. Take a look at the slide to see all design features and the examples for each. Now, what brings us to our questions. Take the time and think about it, and name 3 design features of language and how they support the validity of sign language. Question 2. How does the word order of ASL and English differ, and why?